Intelligence cycle management refers to the overall activity of guiding the intelligence cycle, which is a set of processes used to provide decision-useful information to leaders. The cycle consists of several processes, including planning and direction, collection, processing and exploitation, analysis and production, dissemination and integration. The related field of counterintelligence is tasked with impeding the intelligence efforts of others. Intelligence organizations are not infallible, but, when properly managed and tasked, can be among the most valuable tools of management and government. The principles of intelligence have been discussed and developed from the earliest writers on warfare to the most recent writers on technology. Despite the most powerful computers, the human mind remains at the core of intelligence. Discerning patterns and extracting meaning from a flood of correct, incorrect, and sometimes deliberately misleading information. Overview. Intelligence. Defined by intelligence, we mean every sort of information about the enemy and his country, the basis, in short, of our own plans and operations. Karl von Clausewitz, On War 1832. One study of analytic culture established the following consensus definitions. Intelligence is secret state or group activity to understand or influence foreign or domestic entities. Intelligence analysis is the application of individual and collective cognitive methods to weigh data and test hypotheses within a secret, socio-cultural context. Intelligence errors are factual inaccuracies in analysis resulting from poor or missing data. Intelligence failure is systemic organizational surprise resulting from incorrect, missing, discarded, or inadequate hypotheses. Management of the intelligence cycle. One basic model of the intelligence process is called the intelligence cycle. This model can be applied and, like all basic models, it does not reflect the fullness of real-world operations. Intelligence is processed information. The activities of the intelligence cycle obtain and assemble information, convert it into intelligence and make it available to its users. The intelligence cycle comprises 5 phases: planning and direction, deciding what is to be monitored and analyzed. In intelligence usage, the determination of intelligence requirements, development of appropriate intelligence architecture, preparation of a collection plan, issuance of orders and requests to information collection agencies. Collection. Obtaining raw information using a variety of collection disciplines such as human intelligence, geospatial intelligence and others. Processing. Refining and analyzing the information. Analysis and production. The data that has been processed is translated into a finished intelligence product, which includes integrating, collating, evaluating, and analyzing all the data. Dissemination. Providing the results of processing to consumers, including the use of intelligence information in net assessment and strategic gaming. A distinct intelligence officer is often entrusted with managing each level of the process. In some organizations, such as the UK military, these phases are reduced to 4, with the analysis and production being incorporated into the processing phase. These phases describe the minimum process of intelligence, but several other activities also come into play. The output of the intelligence cycle, if accepted, drives operations, which, in turn, produces new material to enter another iteration of the intelligence cycle. Consumers give the intelligence organization broad directions, and the highest level sets budgets. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance describes an activity that synchronizes and integrates the planning and operation of sensors, assets, and processing, exploitation, and dissemination systems in direct support of current and future operations. This is an integrated intelligence and operations function. Sensors collect data from the operational environment during the collection phase, which is then converted into information during the processing and exploitation phase. During the analysis and production phase, the information is converted into intelligence. Planning and direction overview. The planning and direction phase of the intelligence cycle includes 4 major steps. identification and prioritization of intelligence requirements, development of appropriate intelligence architecture, preparation of a collection plan, and issuance of orders and requests to information collection agencies. The U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff described planning and direction in 2013 as the development of intelligence plans and the continuous management of their execution. Planning and direction activities include, but are not limited to, the identification and prioritization of intelligence requirements, the development of concepts of intelligence operations and architectures required to support the commander's mission, tasking subordinate intelligence elements for the collection of information or the production of finished intelligence, submitting requests for additional capabilities to higher headquarters, and submitting requests for collection, exploitation, or all-source production support to external, supporting intelligence entities. Requirements. Leaders with specific objectives communicate their requirements for intelligence inputs to applicable agencies or contacts. An intelligence consumer might be an infantry officer who needs to know what is on the other side of the next hill, a head of government who wants to know the probability that a foreign leader will go to war over a certain point, a corporate executive who wants to know what his or her competitors are planning, or any person or organization. National, strategic, establishing the intelligence requirements of the policymakers, is management of the entire intelligence cycle, from identifying the need for data to delivering an intelligence product to a consumer, according to a report by the U.S. Intelligence Board. It is the beginning and the end of the cycle, the beginning because it involves drawing up specific collection requirements, and the end because finished intelligence, which supports policy decisions, generates new requirements. The whole process depends on guidance from public officials, policymakers, the President, his aides, the National Security Council, and other major departments and agencies of government. Initiate requests for intelligence. Issue coordinators interact with these public officials to establish their core concerns and related information requirements. These needs are then used to guide collection strategies and the production of appropriate intelligence products. Military, operational intelligence requirements are determined by the commander to support his operational needs. The commander's requirement, sometimes called essential elements of intelligence, initiates the intelligence cycle. Operational and tactical intelligence always should help the commander select an action. Each intelligence source has different characteristics that can be used, but which may also be limiting. Imagery intelligence, for instance, may depend on weather, satellite orbits, or the ability of aircraft to elude ground defenses, and time for analysis. Other sources may take considerable time to collect the necessary information. Measurement and signature intelligence depends on having built a library of signatures of normal sensor readings, in order that deviations will stand out. In rare cases, intelligence is taken from such extremely sensitive sources that it cannot be used without exposing the methods or persons providing such intelligence. One of the strengths of the British penetration of the German Enigma crypto system was that no information learned from it was ever used for operations, unless there was a plausible cover story that the Germans believed was the reason for Allied victories. If, for example, the movement of a ship was learned through Enigma COMINT, a reconnaissance aircraft was sent into the same area, and allowed to be seen by the Axis, so they thought the resulting sinking was due to IMINT. Intelligence architecture. The intelligence cycle is only a model. Budgetary and policy direction are hierarchically above it. In reality, it is not a cycle, but a series of parallel activities. According to Arthur S. Hulnick, author of What's Wrong with the Intelligence Cycle, collection and analysis, which are supposed to work in tandem, in fact work more properly in parallel. Finally, the idea that decision-makers wait for the delivery of intelligence before making policy decisions is equally incorrect. In the modern era, policy officials seem to want intelligence to support policy rather than to inform it. The intelligence cycle also fails to consider either counterintelligence or covert action. The OODA loop, developed by military strategist John Boyd, discussed in the context of the intelligence cycle, may come somewhat closer, as OODA is action-oriented and spiraling, rather than a continuing circle. Budgeting. The architectural design must then be funded. While each nation has its own budgeting process, the major divisions of the U.S. process are representative, national intelligence, often excluding specifically national-level military intelligence, national-level military intelligence, military tactical intelligence, transnational intelligence, often involving law enforcement for terrorism and organized crime, and internal counterintelligence and anti-terrorism. Depending on the nation, at some level of detail, budgetary information will be classified, as changes in budget indicate changes in priorities. After considerable debate, the U.S. now publishes total budgets for the combination of its intelligence agencies. Depending on the sensitivity of a line item, it may be identified simply as classified activity, not broken out, but briefed to full oversight committees, or only revealed to a small number of officials. It should be possible to empower a committee composed of mid-level officials from the intelligence and policy-making communities to convene regularly to determine and revise priorities. The key is to try to get policymakers to provide guidance for both collection and analysis, to communicate not just what they want but also what they do not. The CFR proposed a market constraint on consumers, in which they could only get a certain amount of intelligence from the intelligence community, before they had to provide additional funding. A different constraint would be that an agency, to get information on a new topic, must agree to stop or reduce coverage on something currently being monitored for it. Even with this consumer-oriented model, the intelligence community itself needs to have a certain amount of resources that it can direct itself for building basic intelligence and identifying unusual threats. It is important that intelligence officers involved in articulating requirements represent both analysts and collectors, including those from the clandestine side. In addition, collections should be affected by the needs of policymakers and operators. All of this argues strongly against any organizational reforms that would isolate the collection agencies further or increase their autonomy, especially in nations with advanced technical senses. There is an interaction between budgeting and technology. For example, the U.S. has tended, in recent years, to use billion-dollar SIGINT satellites, where France has used swarms of microsatellites. The quantity versus quality battle is as evident in intelligence technology as in weapons systems. The U.S. has fought a stovepipe battle, in which SIGINT and IMINT satellites, in a given orbit, were launched by different agencies. New plans put SIGINT, MASINT, and IMINT sensors, corresponding to a type of orbit, on common platforms. Policy factors. Western governments tend to have creative tension among their law enforcement and national security organizations, foreign-oriented versus domestic-oriented organizations, and public versus private interests. There is frequently a conflict between clandestine intelligence and covert action, which may compete for resources in the same organization. Balancing law enforcement and national security. There is an opposition between law enforcement and intelligence, because the two entities are very different. Intelligence is oriented toward the future and seeks to inform policymakers. It lives in an area of uncertainty where the truth may be uncertain. Because intelligence strives to protect its sources and methods, intelligence officials seek to stay out of the chain of evidence so they will not have to testify in court. By contrast, law enforcement's business is the prosecution of cases, and if law enforcement is to make a case, it must be prepared to reveal how it knows what it knows. The bulk of U.S. Intelligence efforts overseas are devoted to traditional national security concerns. As a result, law enforcement must ordinarily be a secondary concern. FBI and D agents operating abroad should not be allowed to act independently of either the ambassador or the CIA, lest pursuit of evidence or individuals for prosecution cause major foreign policy problems or complicate ongoing intelligence and diplomatic activities. There are likely to be exceptions, and a degree of case-by-case decision-making will be inevitable. What is needed most is a Washington-based interagency mechanism involving officials from intelligence, law enforcement, and foreign policy to sort out individual cases. One now exists. The challenge is to make it work. At home, law enforcement should have priority and the intelligence community should continue to face restraints in what it can do vis-a-vis American citizens. The protection of civil liberties remains essential. National organizations intended for foreign operations, or military support, should operate within the home country only under specific authorization and when there is no other way to achieve the desired result. Regardless, the ability of intelligence agencies to give law enforcement incidentally acquired information on U.S. citizens at home or overseas ought to be continued. There should be no prohibition on the intelligence community collecting information against foreign persons or entities. The question of what to do with the information, however, should be put before policymakers if it raises foreign policy concerns. President Harry S. Truman had legitimate concerns about creating a Gestapo, so he insisted that the new CIA not have law enforcement or domestic authority. In an era of transnational terrorism and organized crime, there may not be clean distinctions between domestic and foreign activities. Public versus private. During the Cold War, national security was a federal government monopoly. To be sure, private citizens and corporations were involved, but there was a neat correspondence between the threat as defined and the federal government's national security machinery that was developed to meet that threat. The war against terrorism and homeland security will be much less a federal government monopoly. Citizens of democracies and the economy are already suffering the inconvenience and higher business costs of much tighter security. And tragically, more ordinary citizens are likely to die from transnational terrorism. Public and private interests can both complement and conflict when it comes to economic intelligence. Multinational corporations usually have a form of capable intelligence capabilities in their core business. Lloyd's of London has extensive knowledge of maritime affairs. Oil companies have extensive information on world resources and energy demands. Investment banks can track capital flow. These intelligence capabilities become especially difficult when private organizations seek to use national capabilities for their private benefit. Sometimes, a quid pro quo may be involved. Secret economic information can be collected by several means, mostly SIGINT and HUMINT. The more sensitive reconnaissance satellites may not be needed to get substantially correct imagery. Earth resources satellites may give adequate, or even better detail. Reconnaissance satellites tend not to have the multispectral scanners that are best for agricultural or other economic information. The private sector may already have good information on trade policy, resources, foreign exchange, and other economic factors. This may not be open source in the sense of being published, but can be reliably bought from research firms that may not have the overhead of all-source security. The intelligence agencies can use their all-source capability for verification, rather than original collection. Intelligence agencies, working with national economic and diplomatic employees, can develop policy alternatives for negotiators. One subtle aspect of the role of economic intelligence is the interdependence of the continental and world economies. The economic health of Mexico clearly affects the United States, just as the Turkish economy is of concern to the European community. In a post-Cold War environment, the roles of Russia and China are still evolving. Japan, with a history of blurred lines between industry and government, may regard a policy as perfectly ethical, which would be questionable in North America or Eastern Europe. New groupings such as the Shanghai Cooperative Organization are principally economic. Economic measures also may be used to pressure specific countries, for example, South Africa while it sustained a policy of apartheid, or Sudan while there is widespread persecution in Darfur.